Hello and welcome to another edition of the CFB Super Show, brought to you as always by the FTN Network, the world famous FTN Network. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85. You can call me Walt, you can call me Dub. You just don't call me late for a meal because I'm not missing many lately, let me tell you guys. All right, it is the summer. We're going through conference by conference. We did the college basketball previews there at the season ends to give you something to chew on there. Now we're rolling through the college football here preview. There's, spring practices and all that to chew on. Now we're getting into the summer. We're going to be through the summer here in any minute, man. It's crazy. I'm just going to blink an eye and all of a sudden it's going to be week 0. Fall stuff happening. We have a lot that we've already covered from the Pac-12, the Big 12. Now we're going to be talking about the SEC. I've done some other previews with the transfer portal as well. It did just come out today, or at least I noticed it today. Prize Picks put out some season-long props. I'm not going to necessarily talk about those on tonight's show, but next week I am going to get into the props a little bit more. Still have to cover the ACC, so we'll do a preview of that next week as well, and then at the end kind of start to get into those season-long props. And really the following show before week 0, I'm going to get into any betting opportunities that I like from a future standpoint, a prop betting standpoint, any of that good stuff. We're really going to dive in, cut our teeth, and do our thing. So a lot of excitement happening there. You guys know we're upgrading the show. We got the banner back there. The next order of business is the improved lighting, which we're working on, and a better camera, which is also on its way. My birthday is August 2nd, so just here very, very soon. And that is on the wish list to get a better camera. So I'm working my way through there, checking out, doing some stuff. So I appreciate everybody continues to support the show. Make sure you get over to ftndaily.com. You don't want to miss any of the content that's going on. NFL's right around the corner. Our team, the NFL guys, they have so much juicy content from a dynasty standpoint, season-long standpoint, best ball standpoint, daily fantasy. I mean, there's an incredible amount of stuff on the FTN Daily site, the FTN Bet site, just the FTN Network in general. The YouTube channel and all the social media stuff that's going on, FTN really is headed to the moon. I say it all the time. A lot of people think I'm joking. Really not, man. We've got plans to go to the moon. So you want to make sure you have joined us and you're with us when that happens, because it's going to be awfully crowded when we make that journey to outer space and the moon. Really excited, though. We're going to have a lot of good stuff for college football this season. Brought on some new talent. Of course, you can count on the Super Show to be here each and every week, Thursday nights, 9 p.m. PST, midnight EST. I know it's late for some of you guys when we do that, move the show to Thursday. Of course, you can watch it on demand for a couple of days. I will have my co-pilot, my co-host, Jay Kuchek, there breaking down the slates with me as well. And then, of course, Saturday morning, each and every Saturday morning early, about an hour and a half before lock, I will be showing up just to kind of rehash and recap and talk about my core, if anything's changed, and also to highlight any news, late-breaking stuff. Really pride ourselves in our Discord and our shows to be up to date on all the news. We do the message board thing. We've got Twitter lists, although I know Twitter's been kind of messed up. You can't really use your tweet deck as well anymore, and there's some more changes happening there. But we do pride ourselves on being very plugged in. So that Saturday morning show is just really to recap any questions you have that you might have, we get answered. And then again, applying any news and how we're going to attack and be able to, roll with it, especially when there's late breaking news, when there's a scratch at an important position, really being able to take that 15 to 20 minutes time and process it and tell you how to attack it best really comes in handy. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into the SEC preview here, and we're going to go team by team, doing the projected depth chart thing, talking a little bit about, the relevant pieces and any other news that we want to go on here. So also, before we get into that, the big news of today is that Colorado wanted some sort of, the Pac-12 in their infinite poor leadership, Colorado wanted some sort of plan for the future, how are we going to do this revenue stuff? What's the deal? They had a deadline on it. Pac-12, of course, didn't do anything with it. And of course, now they're going to be leaving the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is just completely falling apart. I don't think it's long before that conference is dead. I don't even know that we would get a team like San Diego State to come there now. As long as my Washington Huskies land well, and I know they will, I'm happy. Programs like the Washington State Cougars, those are the ones that might be in trouble. Like we're talking about, they might be falling to a lower conference, or gosh, I don't know, maybe the Big Sky. Probably not that bad, but we'll see what happens. All right. Let's just jump right in. We'll go alphabetical order. Felt like that'd be the easiest thing, or semi-alphabetical order, and start here with the world famous Alabama Crimson Tide here. And of course, the SEC is going to look a little bit different next year in 2024. They will be adding Oklahoma and Texas, so a little bit more added to the deck, and a much tougher schedule for most of the teams, with those teams being added. So it'll be very interesting. But alas, this is the minus Oklahoma and Texas final year of the SEC. So Alabama, it's a little bit tricky. We've been able to rely on them at the quarterback position for years. We know what we're going to get typically. We know that, we don't usually have to, worry about there being any quarterback changes, or, hey, if I pay up for this Alabama quarterback, he's going to get pulled. What's going to happen? He's going to have a bad game. Typically, no. We know over the last couple of years, Bryce Young, we can pay that price for him. He's going to get it done. Yeah, maybe he doesn't give us the, the rushing yardage and some of these other sexier stats that we really want, but we know he's typically going to perform at a high level. Same thing with Mac Jones. We knew he was going to perform at a high level. Now coming into the year for Alabama, we're not quite too sure. It's a bit tricky, right? Jalen Milroe, battling it out there. The redshirt freshman Ty Simpson, he's in the mix. They do bring in the Notre Dame transfer, Tyler Buckner. So there's a lot of that I feel uneasy about with the Alabama quarterback position, and I truly feel like we may end up in a situation where heading into the first part of the season, we don't have a definitive answer at the quarterback spot, and they may end up playing multiple quarterbacks. We'll see how it works out. I would say that, Buchner's probably, my personal opinion, the best to take the gig, but it just really a lot up in the air there with the quarterback spot. And it's not going to be something where I feel very confident in. If any of those guys come into the season super high priced, it's an easy fade for me as well. The wide receivers, I think, will be negatively impacted here. I do think if we're going to be targeting Bama, and, it's really one of those situations over the last couple of years with Bama, Ohio State, hey, there's blowouts. How can we pay these prices for these guys? Are we going to get our money's worth out of them? And I feel like just because of the jersey that they're wearing, most of those guys will be expensive. And I think quarterback and wide receiver is going to be, at least for me early on, a position for this team that I'm not looking at too much. Running backs for Bama, yes, and maybe tight end. At the running back spot, Jace McClellan, the next in line there to get the work right with the workload that he had a year ago. Roydell Williams, part of that rotation as well. But they do have the freshman Justin Haynes coming in, and he's looked very, very good in the spring. And I would be shocked if Haynes didn't get work as part of this rotation. Not a ton, maybe not a bell cow or anything, but enough to really harm McClellan if he's priced at like $9K, or harm Roydell Williams from being a solid value. When you look at it, McClellan last year scored 10 total touchdowns, over 800 yards from scrimmage as a rusher and a pass catcher. Roydell rushed for 250 yards, 4 touchdowns, so he's going to give you some of those tougher yardage. And then can't even forget about Jam Miller, who pretty solid in mop-up duty last year in his own right, 220 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a very strong running back room with suitable options. Any one of those guys, including Justice Haynes, I think would be fine if they were to get the RB1 gig. But I don't think this is an ideal situation for fantasy purposes, and especially early on before they get to the conference part of their schedule, you might see kind of a little bit of a more deeper rotation at the running back spot where, yeah, if you jump the gun and pay up for McClellan early on, you may get, 15 to 20 points because he scored a couple touchdowns, but then you might not get that second half. And then another running back outscores him for cheaper, and then you're kind of dead to rights. However, if you get cute and try to play a Jam Miller, maybe he doesn't score, doesn't get enough carries to really pay off even at a min price or 4K, whatever that might be. So you really have to be careful with this running back situation for Alabama as well. I'm feeling like, me personally, if I'm going to this team, I'm looking at the tight end or one of those running backs, depending on price. At the wide receiver spot, Jermaine Burton returns 40 catches, 677 yards, 7 touchdowns. Ja'Cory Brooks and Kobe Prentice also back. Brooks caught 39 passes, 674 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Kobe Prentice 31, 337, and 2. Malik Benson is a JUCO transfer, absolutely smashing during spring and practices. Somebody that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. I know I just said I'm really kind of leery about the wide receiver room for Alabama just because I'm worried about the quarterbacks. But Malik Benson's definitely somebody to keep an eye on. If he comes into the season super cheap and depending on that first depth chart that comes out, he is somebody that I'll walk back my fear of wide receivers on. During his time at the junior college level, at least last year, 59 catches, almost 1,000 yards, 977 to be exact, and 10 touchdowns. Really like Benson. Excited to see what he might be able to do. Obviously, the JUCO level is a lot different than playing in the SEC. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you, hey, this guy's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver. Look what he did last year. That would be pretty silly. But I do think 500-plus yards and being a solid guy, if he's under 5K, we can potentially look at. So a lot has to do with the quarterback, and then we can start to decide other spots here. But tread carefully with this team. One bit of edge for DFS purposes early on is the fact that, more casual players or maybe team players who just kind of cut corners are going to see Alabama. They're going to see Ohio State. They're going to see these upper tier teams that have historically been the stacks, and they're going to take players from those teams and ignore others. That's where our edge is going to be, because we're going to know, hey, this team's too deep. We need to wait on them. Let's take this team who has a solid WR1 getting all the targets, or a bell cow, but nobody knows about these guys, that kind of situation. So I think Bama is going to be a popular team as usual, but a very sharp fade early on. Now, the new offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, we know, Notre Dame fame, he loves his tight ends, man. He is a big fan of the tight end. They do bring in a Maryland transfer by the name of C.J. Dipray, who caught 30 passes, 314 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So my exposure to Alabama early on, of course, I'm just talking here, not knowing prices and kind of guessing. As somebody who maybe, be cheap, we've seen Alabama tight ends in the past be under 5K, under 4K. He's somebody that I would feel pretty comfortable with if you wanted that exposure, depending on what a slate looks like. I think Dupre is going to have a pretty solid season there for Alabama once they get things figured out. First couple of games may be hair pulling. Don't got a lot of that right now. But it might be a situation to just wait and see with them. All right, moving on to Arkansas, a team that is much easier to predict where the production is going to come back, because they have some nice continuity returning. KJ Jefferson, a brand favorite, not so popular initially. FTN, we were using him a lot. He was low owned for a while, and then everybody figured out how just good he can be, how great he can be. And he's always popular now, and I think that'll be the case here. And he's probably not going to be cheap ever again. 2,600 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions. Very, very nice there. 640 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns. KJ Jefferson, a high-end, high-level quarterback, DFS and fantasy-based god. All right. At the running back spot for Arkansas, again, familiar names. Rocket Sanders comes in after rushing for 1,400 yards a season ago, 10 touchdowns. Also showed off a little bit of pass catching ability. 28 catches, 271 yards, 2 touchdowns. Rocket Sanders and KJ Jefferson. I'm a little bit of a contrarian, not even a little bit. I'm a lot of it, right? I don't play guys just because everyone else says to. I really believe in our own research. And this is a situation where I'll be playing KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders together. And conventional wisdom will tell you, you can't play a running back with your quarterback. What are you doing? You can't do that. There's what? KJ Jefferson is a running quarterback. That's going to hurt him. Well, the offense in Arkansas is going to be based around those two, and they're going to get their touches. And there's going to be a game where KJ Jefferson might rush 2 or 3 touchdowns. He may rush for 100-plus yards, but Rocket Sanders is also going to rush for 100-plus yards, and he's going to catch, 2 or 3 passes, 50-plus yards. Maybe he scores a touchdown. Maybe he doesn't, but the PPR will do its job. And I love the upside for both of those players this year. So it's pretty silly, but that's, again, another edge where you can play your running backs with your quarterbacks in certain offenses, and this is certainly one of them. A.J. Green returns, not that A.J. Green, not that A.J. Green, and also not that A.J. Green. It's Arkansas's A.J. Green. 414 yards, 3 touchdowns. It's a popular name in the sports community. And Rashad Dubian, 293 yards and 5 touchdowns. So Arkansas is packing some punch there with their returners at the running back spot. When it comes to wide receiver, they're going to look a lot different. They do bring in a Memphis transfer who redshirted last year in Marlon Crockett. Isaac Tesla, who was at Hillsdale College, which is a Division II, a absolute monster, 68 catches, over 1,300 yards, 13 touchdowns. Again, Division II, a lot different than the SEC. We'll have to temper expectations, but any level of football where you can produce over 1,300 yards, you have to definitely respect. Andrew Armstrong transfers in from Texas A&M, not Texas A&M that you know, but Texas A&M Commerce. 62 catches, 1,100 yards, almost, just under, and 13 touchdowns. So again, another high-end producer at a lower than the SEC level school, but definitely has shown he can do it. And a former Maction brand favorite, Tyrone Broden, who's a Bowling Green transfer, 32 catches, 506 yards, and 7 touchdowns. So they're bringing in a bunch of new faces in the receiver room. Those guys will have to get acclimated to KJ Jefferson. I think Broden is an obvious, PPR type of choice there, with Armstrong and Tesla being a little bit more unknowns, high, heavy production, but they're going to have to show us that they can do that at the SEC level. And then they bring in a North Texas transfer at the tight end spot in Varkey's Gums, 34 catches, 450 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Some solid production. This Arkansas offense is going to be a favorite of ours here at FTN when it comes to fantasy purposes. Definitely going to be targeting them a lot. And there's going to be a myriad of ways to get different. When on slates where KJ Jefferson appears to be heavy chalk, we might be able to get Rocket Saunders for much lower ownership than he should be. We'll be able to maybe take a shot on an Isaac Tesla, maybe Varkey's Gums. Maybe this is a defense they're facing this week that's awful against the tight ends. Maybe we can get Gums at 5%. So there's going to be a variety of ways we can attack this offense and stack them without having all chalk in our lineups as well. All right, moving on to Auburn, another team in the SEC that's definitely got some new faces and some familiar ones at the quarterback spot. Anything could be better for Auburn than what they had last season at the quarterback spot. And then to watch Bo Nix go to Oregon and absolutely just detonate, that's a tough one to swallow. But Peyton Thorne coming in from Michigan State, 6,500 yards and 49 touchdowns over the course of his 3 years at Michigan State. The Spartans rushed for almost 300 yards and 6 touchdowns during this career there with the Spartans as well. Thorne is an adequate passer. He's one of those guys, it's like when you get later in the season, he's a little bit on the cheaper side for a starter. He's not going to break the slate. He's not going to, also detonate your lineup to the point where you're bottoming out. He's typically going to give you like that 20-point score. He's one of those type of guys, right? At running back, Tank Bigsby's gone, one of the big-time FTN favorites, almost 1,000 yards. That's tough, but you got to look at Jarquez Hunter, what he did last year, rushed for 668 yards, 7 touchdowns, also caught 17 passes for almost 230 yards and 2 touchdowns. Hunter is on a lot of breakout lists. I've read a bunch of previews. I've seen the Twitter threads where different accounts are asking people what they think their breakout's going to be, and I'm seeing Hunter's name come up a lot. But you do have to factor in that they're bringing in Brian Battie, a South Florida transfer who kind of almost quietly racked up 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. And I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that because South Florida wasn't a team that many outside of a few degenerates like myself really paid attention to. So the running back room still pretty strong even without Bigsby. If Battie, again, playing at South Florida is obviously different than the SEC, but he can definitely rack up some yards, take some heavy carries, and his workload can be huge. So while I think Hunter will certainly warrant being looked at as a breakout candidate, it's not as if he's going to tote it 30-plus times here. They will definitely be in a situation where they're sharing the rock, but Hunter is a different runner than Battie overall, and I certainly like that aspect of Auburn. All right, at wide receiver, they got our guy Shane Hollywood Hooks, who was a Maction favorite of mine in the 2019-2020 era for Ohio. 26 catches, 515 yards, 5 touchdowns. Not in a super sexy stat line, but he's really good. Went to Jackson State, played a little bit there, didn't put up sexy stats there either. But trust me when I tell you, if Hollywood's in a spot where he's going to get WR1 snaps and targets, he's going to put up big, big numbers. And I think people are going to forget just how good Hooks can be. Maybe more of a tourney type of play with his high ceiling, lower floor, but I'm really excited to see what he can do in this offense. It's a little bit maybe lackluster to see him paired up with Peyton Thorne, but I think Thorne's good enough. And we did see Thorne throw to some solid receivers last season at Michigan State, so he can definitely make Hooks a viable DFS option. Jair Shorter transfers from North Texas. We're going to talk about a few North Texas transfers over the course of this show. Crazy that several of them went to the SEC. Last year, 23 catches, 628 yards, and 11 touchdowns. A lot of touchdown equity in that North Texas offense. A couple of okay years, and then if you look back to 2019, 24 catches, 473 yards, and 9 touchdowns. So Shorter is one to watch for sure. Nick Martiner comes over from Hawaii last year, 46 catches, 2021, 46 catches, 913 yards, 5 touchdowns. He has transferred a couple of times. Last year, he was at Cincinnati, 19 catches, 218 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Javarius Johnson is the main returner in terms of production for Auburn, 26 catches, 493 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then they do have an Ohio State transfer by the name of Caleb Burton, who comes in. Looks like he will get a role. We'll see. Pedigree is there. Didn't play a lot. All right, and at tight end, Rivaldo Fairweather transfers in from Florida International, the Florida International, 28 catches, 426 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So there's some guys in this offense for Auburn that we definitely want to look at. Moving on to the Florida Gators. Graham Mertz coming in from Wisconsin. That Wisconsin offense was brutal. We talked about, during the Big Ten show, how life without Mertz will be interesting. Wisconsin definitely has an offense that will be more DFS viable. Same with Iowa. Mertz getting a fresh start here. Still has Jack Miller there at Florida as the clipboard holding backup, where it's like you feel okay if there's an injury, you can put Miller in, but if Miller, you're never starting the game with him by choice. But Mertz coming in, his course of his career at Wisconsin, 5,400 yards, 38 touchdowns, 26 interceptions. The offense didn't do him any favors, but also Mertz had opportunities to perform, and he just didn't. So we'll see what happens with this Gators offense. I'm not super high on it in terms of a passing offense, but they certainly have the running back room that could definitely pay off huge if we go down this route. Montrell Johnson is back after rushing for 841 yards and 10 touchdowns. I love Montrell Johnson this year. Most people that I've seen are higher on Trevor Etienne, who is also going to be solid after rushing for 700 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. Both of them will get work. I prefer Johnson. I just like him as a better runner, but I know Etienne excites people a little bit more. And also Cam Carroll comes in from Tulane. Played just the one game last year, but if you look at it, he rushed for 360-plus yards in 3 straight seasons at Tulane prior to last year, and he had the best season in 2020 when he racked up almost 750 yards and 12 touchdowns. Of course, FTN brand favorite Tyjae Spears made most people forget about Cam Carroll last year, but do not overlook Cam Carroll, as he is somebody who has proven in the past he can be a productive guy. However, there is a 3-headed monster brewing here for Florida at the running back spot. So a lot of this is going to be price dependent, and I don't think we'll ever really, barring an injury, want to pay a heavy price for one of these guys just because of the cannibalization that I'm expecting within the carries. At wide receiver, Ricky Pearsall is your number 1 receiver returning from a production standpoint. 33 catches, 661 yards, 5 touchdowns. You also have Caleb Douglas coming back, 10 catches, 175 yards, 2 touchdowns, and Marcus Burke. I do want to drop a name that may be sneaky, somebody we want to bank for later. You guys know I'm always looking for those plays that maybe they're not relevant right now, but we want to keep them in the mind somewhere, stash them for later. Freshman Andy Jean. I am hearing that based off his play, early on in spring ball and practice, that he's probably going to be a factor early on. I think there's going to be a chance for us to roster him for low ownership at a cheap price. Not a main team play by any means, but if those of you that are doing the MME thing, you'll be able to throw him into some large fields and possibly walk away with a big time score before the rest of the industry figures out just how good he can be. Doesn't have that high end speed. I know that a lot of receivers only get hyped because, they're so fast, they can get down the field. Gene's more of a technical route runner, somebody who's going to be a factor for PPR purposes. Maybe he's not breaking these big plays wide open, but he's racking up, catches, 4 yards here, 3 yards there, 7 yards there. Not super sexy, but he has a real nice juke moves. While he can't beat guys with his speed, he can with his, again, technical route running. And I have seen some videos where he's got this little like juke step thing that he does. So I like Andy Gene, somebody to really kind of pay attention there for the future. And then at tight end, it's really not that great. Somebody will emerge here potentially, but the tight end spot for Florida feels like a little bit of a wasteland at this moment. Dante Zanders does return 10 catches, 75 yards, but with Graham Mertz, you're going to have to really talk to me more about some of these pass catchers here. Gene, only because I'm expecting him to be cheap. But if Parasol comes into it, because he was the WR1 super expensive, there's no way you could con me into touching him early on, depending on what that price would be. So with Florida, we're looking at the running game, but we have to really temper our expectations because there's not a bell cow in that running back room right now. Going to Georgia, the quarterback spot will be different. Stetson Bennett is gone. Carson Beck, who completed 74% of his passes last year in a backup role on 35 attempts, threw for 310 yards and 4 touchdowns. Brock Vandegrift is there as well. We'll see what happens. The Georgia team, rarely is it wise to roster their quarterback anyways, because they're running the football so much. They're blowing out teams so much. It's just really tough to get behind rostering a Georgia quarterback. Could that change this year? Certainly, but I highly doubt it. The running back room, strong as ever. Yes, Kenny McIntosh is gone, the best pass-catching running back on the team last year. 1,300 yards from scrimmage. That's gone. Kendall Milton's still there, 590 yards on the ground, 8 touchdowns, just 5 catches for 64 yards, so wasn't really the pass catcher there. Dejon Edwards, 771 yards on the ground, 7 touchdowns, but he did catch 14 passes for 101 yards. Might he absorb some of that receiving work that McIntosh had? Possibly. And then Branson Robinson, 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, is basically the RB4. So he's going to be moving up to that RB3 role, maybe sometimes the RB2. Going to get a lot of that work in the blowout. So Branson Robinson is there racking up yards, getting yardage that some teams' RB2s are getting as an RB4. At the wide receiver spot, they're strong as ever. Marcus Rosemary, Jack Saint, and Ladd McConkey are your 2 main returners. McConkey, 58 catches for 762 yards and 7 touchdowns. Jack Saint, 29 catches, 337 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Looking at the transfer portal, they bring in 2 primary weapons. Dom Lovett from Missouri, who had in his short career of 2 years now, his best season last year. 56 catches, 846 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Really took advantage of Luther Burden coming in, getting all that defensive attention, all that hype as a highly rated prospect. People forgot, and Lovett really took advantage of that in single coverage, and he made teams pay. Also, Thomas, transferring in from Mississippi State. So you have 2 in-conference transfers. I know I harp on those every week. Just so weird to me. 44 catches, 626 yards, 7 touchdowns. The WR1 for Mississippi State for production. So bringing in there, that's a nice option there for the Georgia passing game. And of course, FTN brand favorite Brock Bowers. We have for multiple seasons now gotten some massive games from Brock Bowers at super low ownership. People are always afraid to roster him because his price is high, and he typically only plays the first half. And a lot of times he's putting up 25 plus fantasy points with one half of football. The time to roster Bowers is typically towards the later middle, if that makes a sense of the season. Sometimes we can get him in early, but we really want to start targeting him as the season hits its final stretch of 4 games and into bowl season, of course. 63 catches, 942 yards, and 7 touchdowns last year. He also toted it 9 times for 109 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he has that in his bag as a rushing threat as well. Just a really well-rounded guy. I would expect 1,000+ yards from him this season. I really do. I mean, this is it probably, right? Draft eligible. Bowers is going to be looking to have a big season. So it would be a very disappointing year and a big shocker for me if he wasn't 1,000+ yard tight end this year. All right, moving on to the Kentucky Wildcats. They have an offense that is intriguing. I do like Kentucky bringing in NC State transfer Devin Leary. Injuries limited him to just 6 games last year, but he still threw for 1,300 yards and 11 touchdowns in those 6 games. You look back to the prior season of 2021 when he was healthy the entire way, 3,400 yards, 35 touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions. A healthy Devin Leary is a fantasy weapon. Now, going from the ACC to the SEC, some may argue is more difficult. Some may argue that it's less difficult. I certainly think he'll be seeing a lot better defenses on a consistent basis, but I'm very confident in Devin Leary, and I think this offense is going to be a lot of fun for fantasy purposes. So buy your stocks now in an elder statesman and an upperclassman coming off of a serious injury in Devin Leary. At the running back spot, Jutane McClain comes back. Obviously, Chris Rodriguez is out. We thought Rodriguez would miss more time. Didn't end up happening. I thought Jutane McClain was going to break out and have a big season. He did rush for just under 300 yards. Still going to be in a backup role, though. If you think he's going to take a step forward here, he might, but he's not going to be the RB1. They do bring in our guy, Ray Davis, formerly of Temple and Vanderbilt. Last year, he was a 1,000-yard rusher for Vanderbilt, 900+ yards during his freshman season at Temple back in 2019. I do envision him rushing for 1,000+ yards in this offense. Definitely. At the receiver, for me, it's a 3-headed group here, the trio of receivers for Kentucky that are all viable, all relevant. Darian Brown is going to be the one that I think most people talk about just because of his semi-breakout. Most of us, myself included, were looking at Dane Key to hit the ground running immediately. He had a nice season, Dane Key, 37 catches, 519 yards, 6 touchdowns. I do think those numbers go up. But you look at Darian Brown, 50 catches, 628 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's certainly probably going to flirt with an 800+ yard season. And then, of course, you can't forget you have the versatile Tavion Robinson there as well. 40 catches, 497 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Tight end position, main returner Brennan Bates, 10 catches, 99 yards, and a touchdown. But Key, Brown, and Tay-Rob, those guys will all be viable. And I think the way to attack that is really just price dependent, taking the cheaper one, or if you have the salary and you fall into somebody, maybe a Darian Brown who's more expensive, totally fine. But for me, I'm perfectly content taking the cheapest of those 3 on a weekly basis. And I love Ray Davis this year. I've always been a big Ray Davis fan. In this offense, yes, sign me up for the upperclassman, Ray Davis. All right, moving on. Next, we have LSU. I got to give it to my man, Jaden Daniels. 2 years ago, the ASU team, Jake and I, we loved our man, Rashad White, called him Rachel affectionately. We loved our guy, Jaden Daniels. He had an okay season. He wasn't a consistent option, but going into it at LSU, I don't think anyone could have thought he would break out the way he did. And Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix both, going from the Pac-12 to the SEC, one going from the SEC to the Pac-12. Obviously, that's easier, in my opinion. I think a lot of people would say that, to go from the SEC to the Pac-12. So Bo Nix explosion, maybe not as surprising, but Jaden Daniels coming into the SEC and doing as well as he did for LSU and putting up a huge year was a bit of a shocker. I knew he could put up big, massive slate-breaking games, but there was no consistency there at ASU, and the fact that he was really consistent with LSU just speaks to how good he can be. And he's going to hold off, plenty of talent in the QB room again for one more year. I think it's undisputed, unquestionable QB1 for LSU. passed for almost 3,000 yards, 2,900, 17 touchdowns, rushed for 885 yards and 11 touchdowns. You love your dual threat quarterbacks when it comes to DFS and fantasy. Jaden Daniels, an expensive option, I'm sure, but somebody that we're going to be using a lot. And then in 2024, this will finally, assuming he doesn't transfer, will be Grant Nussmeier's time. Did throw for 800 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. Nuss will be in that backup role. If LSU has some early season blowouts, we'll get a chance to see Nuss, but he's the 2024 guy for sure. At the running back spot, this is another team that can run the football in the SEC, but has a super overcrowded running back room. They returned 4 guys who rushed for 250 plus yards last year. That's tough. Noah Cain, 409 yards, 10 touchdowns somehow. I watched a ton of football last year, and obviously being in this industry, I look at a lot of stats and a lot of metrics and a lot of, all kinds of stuff. And I somehow still didn't register that Noah Cain rushed for 10 touchdowns. May have been one of the quietest 10 touchdowns of the year. Josh Williams, who became a bit of a fan favorite there midseason, 532 yards, 6 touchdowns. John Emery, who has the pedigree, former 5-star. We're all waiting for him to pop off every year. This will be the year everyone, kind of writes him off, and I wouldn't be shocked to see him explode, honestly. But 375 yards, 6 touchdowns last year. And then Armani Goodwin, who was a viable value at times last year, 267 yards, 5 touchdowns. So those guys together right there, you'd be like, damn, that's 4 guys who are going to get carries. That's pretty full. But then you go and look, oh, wow, they went into the transfer portal and they sniped Logan Diggs. Wow, what? Why do they need Logan Diggs? Logan Diggs, all he did last year for Notre Dame was rush for 822 yards and 4 touchdowns. There's clearly not enough football for these guys. I think LSU, obviously they've dealt with injuries at the RB position several times over the years. This is clearly a move, to shore things up and protect against some of the players who maybe have injury histories. I think Logan Diggs is not coming in to be a just in case of injury guy, though. I think Logan Diggs is coming in to be the RB1. And if he's not getting the first carries in their first game, that would actually be quite surprising to me. You have guys like Noah Cain, John Emery, Armani Goodwin, Josh Williams, who can also get carries, extend drives, get tough yardage. But I think Logan Diggs is going to be the guy here. All it's going to do, though, is it's going to frustrate you, because we're probably going to get, say that week 1, Diggs has a nice game, puts up like 18, priced at $5K. Then you're going to go into week 2 and you're going to be like, damn, that's really good price for him. He had 18 carries, put up 18 fantasy points. I can do this. I'm going to rock him. I'm going to pull the trigger here. And then you're going to see him get like 13 carries, 89 yards or even 99 yards, just to add insult to injury. No touchdowns. Every time they get under the 5 yards, in the red zone, Jaden Daniels punches it in, or Armani Goodwin comes in and snipes 2 touchdowns with his 3 carry, 5 yard and 2 touchdown stat line. That's going to happen with this LSU team. So we'll tread carefully. They're an MME squad for sure. I'm going to be really hard pressed to take a running back from the squad in my main lineup without, doing the butt puckering. That's going to be a term we're talking about a lot this year. I'm going to introduce that and bring it back at the same time. But I do like Logan Diggs, and I think he'll have a nice season. But on a week-to-week basis, there could be some heartache here with this running back room. And you're going to find that's the case with a lot of these SEC teams. At the wide receiver and tight end positions, Malik Nabers is back, 72 catches, 1,000-yard receiving, 3 touchdowns. Nabers is good. I think a lot of people knew that. But with Kayshon Boutte, we thought he was going to reignite that huge production from earlier in his career. And he started to, and he had a fine season, 500-plus yards. But Nabers really emerged as Jaden Daniels' go-to guy. And the fact that he's back after catching 1,000-plus yards with Kayshon Boutte, my God, without Boutte, Nabers is going to have a monster season. You've also got Brian Thomas there, who's fairly reliable, 31 catches, 360 yards, 5 touchdowns. And Kieran Lacy, who, 24 catches, 268 yards, didn't really get used a whole lot, but is a talented guy, somebody who can stretch the field, and I think will have a bigger role here this year. One player to note is Aaron Anderson, another intra-conference transfer from Alabama. only was able to play the one game last year. He was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school and widely considered the #1 high school player out of Louisiana in that 2022 cycle. So Aaron Anderson is somebody, if he can kind of put it all together, could emerge as a legitimate WR3, WR2 for LSU and step right in front of Lacey or even Thomas, next two neighbors there, depending on how well he's able to handle SEC defenses. So the fact that Alabama nabbed him originally, and in a state like Louisiana that churns out a lot of football talent, to be that highly ranked obviously speaks volumes, but rankings don't always mean production. God, we know that in every sport, rankings don't always mean production. Sometimes you have to really repeat that to let it set in. At tight end, Mason Taylor, 38 catches, 414 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's a guy that you can use from like a showdown type player. I don't mind Mason Taylor. All right, moving right along to Mississippi State. Zach Arnett takes over as the head coach. His mentor, Mike Leach, passed away. We know that. R.I.P. Mike Leach. Amazing guy, right? So it's kind of tough to lose him. It is said that Arnett's going to put a little bit more emphasis on running the football than maybe Leach did, adding some additional wrinkles to what is normally a very pass-heavy offense. One thing that we do know is Will Rogers is going to be a guy after throwing for just under 4,000 yards and 35 touchdowns to only 8 interceptions. A couple of years ago, Rogers had like 4, 5, 6 touch interception games. Really did a good job of limiting his turnovers last year. Hopefully that continues, especially if they're going to run the football a little bit more. That remains to be seen. If they do, Joe Marks is going to become a really, really good option. The last couple of years has been the Joe Marks, Dylan Johnson show at running back. Dylan Johnson is off to my Washington Huskies now, where he's going to be in another committee backfield. But Joe Marks remains, and there's really, I don't think, anyone to challenge him for RB1 carries at this point. Marks did rush for 582 yards, 9 touchdowns, caught almost 50 passes for 288 yards. I do think that element to his game remains, and the fact that he probably is looking at 750 plus yards at minimum on the ground without Dylan Johnson. And might he get 1,000 yards in the right situation? Certainly a possibility. At wideout, we know Ra Thomas is off to Georgia. We just mentioned that. We get our guy Jaden Walley back. 33 catches, 348 yards, 3 touchdowns last year. Pretty underwhelming, but the previous 2 seasons, he did have 600 plus receiving yards. And the end, like 2 seasons ago, towards the end, he became one of the best, cheaper wide receivers to use in DFS there for the last like 2 or 3 weeks. Might there be a bounce back, a semi bounce back, a full bounce back, possibly coming for Jaden Walley? I do think so. You look at the receiver room and kind of the main aside next to Walley, Justin Robinson, 30 catches, 326 yards, 3 touchdowns. Later at Griffin, 40 catches, 502 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And Rufus Harvey, 53 catches, 505 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I like Walley the best out of that group. I am partial, but I think he's really, really good, and I think he'll get back to business. And if he can, get his target share back up there, push past 600 yards, he's certainly going to be someone to look at. I think we'll get a lot of, Rufus Harvey and Literak Griffin looks early on from the masses, with people forgetting about Walley, but he's clearly very, very good. And then coming back at tight end, Jaquarius Spivey, he transferred from Mississippi State to TCU, where he played the last couple of seasons, and now he's going to finish his collegiate career at Mississippi State. 11 catches, 136 yards, and a touchdown last year. I don't think he'll be that fantasy relevant here at Mississippi State either, but that is the relevant tight end from a production standpoint from all the other tight ends on the roster. But I think there's going to be a team we're really just looking at Joe Marks or any of the myriad of 4, 5, 6 receivers that they have. All right, Missouri, Brady Cook. They have basically a situation here where the coaching staff is talking about, Drinkwitz talking about Cook's going to get that first shot, but Sam Horn is going to be in the mix as well. And he said, I read an interview, that he likes the idea of using 2 quarterbacks, depending on, what the defense looks like, what the situation is. From a game-to-game basis, we may be seeing different starters. And on that same token, from a game-to-game basis, we may see a situation where one plays a quarter, the other plays another quarter. Now, in the past, that's been awful. clearly awful for us as DFS players, but it's also been awful for real football too, because it causes continuity issues, chemistry issues. Guys can't get into a rhythm. Football is really a game where you need to get into that rhythm, and you can consistently change a guy in and out. This is not NHL hockey. You can't just be making line changes. You need to really, allow these guys to kind of get the juices flowing and build that rapport with each other. So I'm a little bit nervous about that discussion there. We did see Brady Cook, even with Jack Abraham on the roster, handle all of the work as the QB1, completed 64% of his 383 passes, 2,700 yards, 14 touchdowns. To me, it would have been a no-brainer for him to take the job, but Sam Horn is certainly in the mix, apparently. All right, at running back, it is another situation where it's not 5 running backs, even though they're fairly deep to an extent. But Cody Schrader and Nathaniel Pete will be carrying most of the load. Now, last year, Schrader rushed for 745 yards, 9 touchdowns. He also caught 19 passes for 137 yards. Pete showed some real explosiveness there towards the end, 438 yards and 2 touchdowns, also caught 10 passes, 66 yards and a score. Now, coming into it, the freshman Tavares Jones, who I really liked, played just the 4 games, 7 carries, 25 yards, 2 catches for 36 yards. He will be much bigger factor. Elijah Young is gone. A couple other, minor pieces out the door. So I do like Tavares Jones still to an extent, but he's not going to usurp Schrader or Pete. So he's not going to have a lot of value on a game-to-game basis. Just somebody who's going to be one of those random, 20-plus lineup guys where you throw out and he scores 2 touchdowns at mid-price. But I do like him. At wide receiver, Mookie Cooper, Dennis Jenkins, Theo Weiss, and then, of course, superstar Luther Burton coming back. Sounds like he's going to be moving to the slot with Dom Levitt transferring out. Burden will get that spot. And we know Burden, man, big time pedigree, huge, talent. He obviously had a little bit of an underwhelming season from what I think most of us thought he would have. He did have 45 catches, 375 yards, did lead the receivers in touchdowns with 6. So he had that touchdown equity, but the yardage wasn't there. And of course, Dom Lovett ended up exploding for 800 plus yards, as we mentioned earlier. And Barrett Bannister had 457, kind of out of nowhere. So Burden, I think, will have a big – moving to the slot is great. He's going to have some monster PPR games, like 10-plus catch games are coming for Luther Burden. Mookie Cooper, 25 catches for 297 yards last year, will take a bigger role as well. Theo Weiss, I don't know how I feel about that one other than just don't get in the way of Burden's targets for me. We spent the last 4 years at Oklahoma – played just the 1 game in 2021, had to miss the season there. But the year prior in 2020, 37 catches, 530 yards, 4 touchdowns. And last year, 19 catches, 378 yards, 4 touchdowns. Probably looking at something similar to that. Not anything beyond that, would be kind of a shocker, I think. And then Dennis Jenkins, somebody who had maybe like a week or 2 of fantasy relevance where everybody was excited to roster him. Like he had this big game, right? And then he totally fell off. It was 2021 when he last played, 12 catches, 244 yards, 2 touchdowns. Not really too sure what to expect from him just yet. But really, Luther Burden is the guy here. Mookie Cooper to a lesser extent. Burden's going to have a monster season. He's going to be somebody we can roster with a lot of confidence this year. All right, moving on to Ole Miss. A little bit of a confusing situation for the Rebels, at least for me as a content provider, and I want to try to give you guys the best information possible. But at the quarterback spot, it's like, what are we doing here? Because they returned Jackson Dart, who, by all accounts, did a great job last year. Ole Miss obviously underwhelmed. Thought they would win a lot more games. I personally, double-digit games, 3,000 yards. 20 touchdowns, 614 rushing yards for Dart. That's a guy, man. That's a guy that's QB1 relevant and it's going to have even a bigger season. But then they bring in Spencer Sanders, which to me it's a little bit weird for Ole Miss, but it's also really weird for Spencer Sanders, right? Because why is he choosing to spend his last collegiate season with Ole Miss unless he was given a promise of massive playing time or a huge bag of cash, and I say bag of cash figuratively to an extent, to come and play his last year when he could have gone to endless amounts of teams where he'd be the undisputed QB1, play every snap, get to run the football if he wanted, get to audible. I mean, what the hell is going on here? And I mean, you look at Sanders, this is not a backup quarterback. I mean, he's been a frustrating player over the course of his career for DFS purposes, but he's also won us a lot of money. Almost 10,000 passing yards over the course of his career, 67 touchdowns, just under 2,000 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns. And that's in 4 seasons with the Cowboys. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I would hate to see it be yet another, like Missouri's going to maybe do, we're going to play Dart in this game. We're going to play Sanders here. You just have to pick a guy. And that's an impossible decision to pick between Dart and Sanders, because to me, I think Sanders is the guy you go with between the two, but then you run the risk of Dart transferring. Dart's got more time. You want to develop him further. You want him to feel confident. But then that makes Sanders a really probably expensive backup, and it just makes very little sense. They also bring in Walker Howard, who was expected to be the guy at LSU in a couple of years at the quarterback position. He transfers out and heads to Ole Miss as well. He clearly won't be playing anytime soon, but in a year or two, they'll be more relevant there with Walker Howard. So stay tuned on that quarterback situation for Ole Miss, because I just don't get it. I don't understand it at all. But it'll become more clear to us as the offseason wraps up. At the running back spot, Quinshon Judkins, the FTN. I know, we have several brand favorites here on the Super Show. Judkins is one. Jesus, what a season, man. As a true fraud, rushed for almost 1,600 yards and 16 touchdowns. That's just so unfathomable. He set the bar so high. I love Judkins coming in the season. I think he's going to have a great year, but he set the bar so stupid high. There's such a high chance of him to disappoint this season. And I mean by disappoint, like he's still going to rush for 1,000+ yards, but 1,600 yards, 16 touchdowns, that's a really high watermark. Like he may rush for 1,210. And we're going to be like, damn, Judkins, we expected more from you. That's a really good season. 1,212 is a massive season for anyone. But it is, comes with the caveat that Zach Evans is gone. Zach Evans, who at TCU, they treated him like a bubble boy, didn't want him to get hurt. We knew he had massive upside. Comes to Ole Miss, where we expect him to be a bell cow. Judkins gets unleashed. Evans still rushed for 936 yards, and he's a beast. But my God, Judkins is just so freaking good. And now Evans and his 900 yards is gone. Ulysses Bentley is the likely backup, 73 yards, 4 touchdowns last year, probably in a bigger role now. But I feel much better about Judkins' workload now with Evans gone, even though he pretty much pipped Evans right away. So we'll see what happens, but there's a theoretic chance for him to hit above 1,600 yards, but Jesus, they're going to have to give him a lot of work, and they might. At the wide receiver spot, top wideouts Malik Heath and Jonathan Mingo are gone. Both of those two combined for over 1,500 yards, so there's a lot of production to fill. Jalen Robinson also gone. It's a shame because Jalen never got going. During his time at UCF, he put up some pretty big numbers when healthy, and just it never worked out for him at Ole Miss. So they do bring in a couple of new faces to replace those guys. Trey Harris from Louisiana Tech, 65 catches, 935 yards, 10 touchdowns. My worry there is that he has the shell shock of playing SEC defenses and kind of falls off like Jalen Robinson. I'm really kind of worried for Trey in that regard, but he was a stud and he's really, really good. This offense is fun. On paper, should be a decent to borderline elite fantasy asset. There's a wide range of outcomes here, I think, for Trey. Now, I'm much more confident in Zachary Franklin, who comes over after 4 years with UTSA. UTSA arguably had the best receiver room in all of college football. I think if you played fantasy for any length of time last year, it's not arguable. UTSA did have the best receiver room, but there are others that people would probably, counter with. Zachary Franklin, during his 4 years with UTSA, 3,400 receiving yards, 37 touchdowns. I love Franklin. I don't worry about him as much. He's already shown he can do it against upper tier, power teams. So I'm big on Franklin here. I think he comes over and continues to put up a high level of production. Jordan Watkins is back after transferring in last year. 40 catches, 449 yards, 2 touchdowns. Technically the best returner as far as production goes. Dayton Wade is back, 27 catches, 309 yards, 3 touchdowns. And Jalen Knox, who ended up redshirting, but did have over 1,000 receiving yards in 3 years with Missouri. Now at the tight end position, they do bring back Michael Trigg, who little bit of a disappointment, I think. I think we all kind of figured Trigg would have a bigger season than 17, 156, and 3. And I certainly think that he will improve upon those numbers. However, there is a transfer coming in at tight end that is yet another brand favorite in Caden Prescorn. The Memphis transfer, QB turn tight end, the high touchdown equity guy. We loved Prescorn. We were one of the only guys in the industry last year, myself and Jake, to use him, and he really panned out quite well. 48 catches, 602 yards, 7 touchdowns. So expecting him to bring in at least a 35, 505 type of season stat line for them with upside for more. But there are a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. However, this offense can put up a lot of points in a hurry. We know that. So I do like Trigg for a bounce back, but Prescorn is my guy. Moving right along here to South Carolina. Spencer Rattler, a chance to kind of quiet the haters this year. He's coming into it knowing it's his gig, doesn't have to look over his shoulder. Threw for 3,000 yards last year, 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Has his main guy back in Juice Wells. I'm excited about that connection. I think Rattler is definitely somebody we can think about starting to use again in DFS after, the whole industry using him at Oklahoma, not feeling comfortable with it, fading him, and then nobody using him last year, even when he did have some nice games. I think now's the time to start tipping our putting our toe back into the Spencer Rattler waters. At running back, it's a little bit different. Juju McDowell stepping in there after being a backup for last season. 219 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also, Dakarian Joyner will be getting carries as kind of a versatile, pass catcher, get carries type of guy. And then they do bring in, this is another D2 transfer coming into the SEC that put up some monster numbers. Mario Anderson, Newberry College, D2, really strong team in the D2 football. 3,300 yards and 35 touchdowns on the ground in 2 seasons with Newberry. Obviously, South Carolina liked what they saw there. They're bringing him in. An absolute monster, big-time performer. Watch out for Mario. He could be getting heavy carries right away. Wide receiver, mentioned Juice Wells coming back, 68 catches, 928 yards, and 6 touchdowns. I'm expecting a 1,000-yard season from Juice. Going to be our dude, especially if the DK comes in, mispricing him under 5K or something stupid like that. Xavier Leggett returns after catching 18 passes for 167 yards, 3 touchdowns, and Amarian Brown, 23 catches for just under 200 yards. Now, another transfer comes in here from Memphis and Eddie Lewis, 41 catches, 603 yards, 7 touchdowns, had some really big games for Memphis. Wasn't the most consistent from a game-to-game basis, but he did have some legitimate slate-breaking performances there for Memphis. Putting him next to Juice Wells gives Spencer Rattler 2 really devastating targets. This offense should be even more improved despite the fact that they've lost some of their weapons. At tight end, they have a transfer in, multiple transfers actually. Trey Knox, during his time at Arkansas, Trey Knox caught 81 passes for 883 yards and 9 touchdowns. Tongue tie there with all these numbers. That was in 4 years at Arkansas. Josh Simon transfers in from Western Kentucky. During his 4 years, 86 catches, 1,100 yards, 15 touchdowns, and a Florida transfer yet to play any meaningful games in Nick Elskness. So they're retooling the tight end spot there with a numerous amount of transfers. I like Trey Knox clearly. Josh Simon put up some good numbers at WKU, but they have the potential to be rolling out an Eddie Lewis, Juice Wells, Trey Knox trio. That's really good for Spencer Rattler. He can definitely do some damage here, assuming his decision-making is going to continue to improve. And his overall confidence, I think, is back up where it was prior. He's kind of in the dirt there at the end of his Oklahoma tenure. Moving right along to the video game-esque offense of the Tennessee Volunteers. No more Hendon Hooker. I'm very, very sad about that. He was our dude. But you got Joe Milton coming in, who's not the same kind of runner, but definitely has a strong arm, capable of making plays in this offense. This offense is designed to really put up points, regardless of who's calling, the shots there under center. During his time as a primary backup, threw for 971 yards, 10 touchdowns last year, 0 interceptions, and that was during parts of 9 different games. So I'm on board with Joe Milton. I think he's fine here. I'm nowhere near the level of excitement for him that I had for Hendon Hooker, and it's going to be a situation where, yes, this Tennessee offense is putting up a ton of points, but I won't feel obligated to play Milton like I did Hooker once Hooker got up, 8K, 9K, those heavy prices. If Milton gets to that level, I'm not going to feel obligated like probably the rest of the industry will. I'll still get my exposure somewhere, but I'll maybe attack running backs or maybe, try to think, hey, this is going to be a Ramel Keaton game. He's going to catch 150 yards. Milton's going to go for 250 and 2, though, and all of that's going to go to Keaton, something like that. At the running back spot, they have their 2 main returners back, Jalen Wright, who rushed for 875 yards and 10 touchdowns. Jabari Smalls now in his 3rd season, 734 yards, 13 touchdowns. You got the two-headed monster there. Both of those guys are relevant and viable for DFS purposes, and it is a situation where I'll probably just want to take the cheaper of the two on a week-to-week basis. At wide receiver, Jalen Hyatt is gone, and another brand favorite. I know there are many. Cedric Tillman, my man Cedric, are off to the NFL. That's a lot of production to replace, but again, this offense is juiced, and it's going to put up points regardless of who is in the different skill positions. Brew McCoy returns after catching 52 passes, 667 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He's going to be the dude here for sure. But a Squirrel White, after catching 30 passes for 481 yards, 2 touchdowns, is a popular breakout candidate. I am a very big Ramel Keaton truther. I have been for 2 seasons now. 31 catches, 562 yards, 5 touchdowns for Keaton. I love the McCoy-Keaton duo. I think they're going to be those consistent options we can pay that 6-7K price for. They're going to produce for us. Squirrel White will have his games, but Keaton and McCoy, to me, those are my guys, especially Ramel Keaton, because I think the industry will be playing McCoy a lot more than Keaton. Dante Thornton also transfers in from Oregon. That Oregon pass, as good as Bo Nix was, Oregon wide receivers have been so brutal to predict over the last couple of seasons. 17 catches, 366 yards, and a touchdown for Thornton. Those numbers will, despite being a WR3 or WR4, probably be on par or even better in this offense. At tight end, your top statistical returner is Jacob Warren, 12 catches, 163 yards. And McAllen Castles, who was a former Cal transfer and UC Davis transfer. Last year at UC Davis, 30 catches, 347 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Tight ends, it's kind of, okay for the Vols. It's all about that running back, wide receiver spots, and that's really where I'm going to target most of my Vols exposure unless something changes this year with Warren or Castles. Texas A&M. Still got Max Johnson floating around somewhere, but it's Connor Wegman coming in there, 900 yards, 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in 5 games. We'll take it, and a full season under his belt here now coming into it. He should be a very viable option. The problem is they lose Devin Achane. That hurts the team badly, hurts DFS because they're going to go from heavy Achane carries to probably a semi-committee backfield. Another SEC team with multiple running backs that could be, really, really good in one game and then really kind of non-existent the next. Amari Daniels comes back after rushing for 200 yards. Lev Moss rushed for 114 yards. And then they have Ruben Owens, who is a very exciting name to watch, somebody who eventually will break out, but I don't know that he's going to get heavy work early on. And they also bring in David Bailey, who BC transfer, Colorado State transfer, 1,600 yards, 16 touchdowns over the course of his career. Somebody who can chew up the clock, get yardage for him, score touchdowns, kind of replace some of that production loss from Devin Achane. Ruben Owens is the exciting option, but it's going to be one of those ones where if you try to, peg him early, you're probably going to be getting some zeros. You need to be very, very careful with this backfield. There are several names in it that I think will get touches. Wide receiver, a little bit more defined here. Evan Stewart returns after catching 53 passes, 650 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Moose Muhammad, 38 catches, 610 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And then we do get Ainias Smith back. Only played in 4 games, missed most of the year with a serious injury. 15 catches, 291 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Ainias Smith is very good. Assuming that he's, healthy, good to go, no setbacks, he's going to put up a lot of yards. Almost 2,000 yards from scrimmage in the course of his career. We know he started out getting carries, then being a big slot guy, and he can rack up PPR points in a hurry. And then likely WR4 or possibly WR3, Noah Thomas, who caught 5 passes, 51 yards, 2 touchdowns. I've seen quite a bit of talk and chatter about him in the Texas A&M community. All right, we'll wrap up here with Vanderbilt. What can I say about Vanderbilt? Ken Seals is still somehow floating around, but it's A.J. Swan who's going to come in and be the QB1, and I think he might end up being somebody that we can get away with using in single entry. He has a really strong arm, has to improve his decision-making, but I think A.J. Swan's actually going to be a relevant fantasy option this year for Vanderbilt. We're going to have to pick our spots, but I think there'll be a time where, yes, I'm recommending A.J. Swan as QB1 in a main lineup. And it may seem like I hit my head when I recommend it, but trust me, I think Swan's going to work out. At wide receiver, he's got weapons: Will Shepard, Quincy Skinner, and Jaden McCowan. That's their top returning trio. All 3 combined for over 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns last year. So a little bit of continuity there. Love Will Shepard. He's probably, to me, the best of the 3, but Skinner and McGowan also will have their days. And then at the running back spot, they get Patrick Smith back, but not that excited about him. Cedric Alexander, who is a true fresh, he's going to get a heavy workload in that pretty quickly, I think. So look out for him as the primary back for Vandy. It might not be the best thing to get heavy carries for Vandy as a youngster, but at the same time, he'll probably be cheap, and I think we'll be able to throw him out in maybe some 4 running back lineups and have him pan out depending on what that price tag is. So, and speaking of 4 running backs, we're going to talk more about that as we get into strategy and week 0 and all that. But if you're new to the show or you're new to college football, DFS, fantasy, we're one of the only conglomerates that recommends at times playing 4 running backs. Most people will tell you, you got to super flex a quarterback. It's just, you got to do it. You got to do it. And that's one of those things where, yeah, I know that everybody says you have to do that. Just like everybody says I have to play this player. But if that player is no good and I don't want to play him, then I don't have to. And I'm not going to just because he's going to be 60%. I don't fear that. And I don't fear the whole quarterback statistically has to be a super flex because they have the ball more. So many times we've had a running back in the super flex go for 30, 35 plus 40 fantasy points. And that quarterback that everyone said you had to have gets 18 to 24. So that's my tangent real quick about 4 running backs. That might work on SEC heavy slates because of all of these options. There is a ton. All right. So that's going to wrap it up quick and easy. We only have the ACC left to really preview from the power team standpoint. Might do a preview if we have time with some of the lower conference teams. And then again, I'm going to have a show dedicated right before week 0 just to prop lines, futures, all that stuff, books, where you can shop those and any early price pick stuff as well. I will start to tweet those out as well as put them in the CFB Discord because those numbers obviously will change as bets come in. We want to get the best possible number that we can there. So as I've had a chance to analyze that over the next couple of days, you can expect by this weekend me to start to post some of those props that I like for college football. Appreciate all the continued support. Make sure if you're here or on demand, you're hitting that like button, you're interacting with us, you're sharing it, and you're being a part of that FTN community. Our Discord is very, very good. Not only do we, talk shop, as they say, but we're posting news, late scratches, real close to lock scratches, processing it in real time, helping people with their lineups, and not just giving you the, hey, play this guy, but here's the reason why this option A and option B are good, and kind of giving you that, that deeper meaning onto why we like who we like. Next week, we'll be back, same time, same place, the world famous FTN Network. Football season is right around the corner. Appreciate it. Let's go finish up TBT strong. I'll see you guys next week.